on the topic of the Watchers themselves, I
Yep.
was looking through, because we have inside the Bible, like you said, we hear the seraphim described, we hear the cherubim, and then we also have the beasts, and then we have
Yeah.
inside Daniel's visions the other beasts, like we have the one with the multiple horns, the one horn that's grievously wounded and is blaspheming God.
Mhm.
When I was going through the, I believe it was in chapter 17 or 19 of Enoch, when it was describing the different angels and different watchers, it had, of course, the cherubim listed, the seraphim, the Ophanim,
Yep.
and then it said angels of power and angels of principalities.
Yeah.
Would those be within the same ranks, or are those separate?
It's separate ranks. So you have a hierarchy to both loyal and rebellious angels, and so principalities and powers, as they're translated into English, the English translation actually confuses them at times. And so you've got Greek words that are like arche, which would be for like principalities. They might be called rulers in other passages, but again, it all goes back to the word arche. They are lower level, so you have the watchers at the top, and then you have another layer of intermediary angels, and then I think you have messenger soldier angels on the third level. I put this together in the new book, and it's a little bit different than the standard version of of the church, because they're not dealing with the original language, and it gets things up. So you got like powers that will be translated from exousia and dunamis. They're like two different kinds of angels. So I separate those out and match them up, and so you're going to get pillars that are going to go downstream. So you're going to have like the seraphim. They're going to have a hierarchy below them. You've got the archangels who have a hierarchy behind them, and you could argue the cherubim have a hierarchy and the Ophanim have one, or they're part of the same one.
Okay.
And I think, and I tend to think about them as more as one, but you could think of them as having separate ones. So I put that together, and it's in the new book, and I think it starts to make some sense out of some of the terms that are used in the New Testament. We don't get these lower level terms other than angel in that's used in the Old Testament. So like the powers, you don't really get that translation coming out of the Old Testament. So you have to put both of them together to arrive at that hierarchy.
Gotcha. Now, I believe in our last chat, did you say that there's around 10 different classes of angels?
Yeah,
Or am
I
I
would,
wrong?
let's see, I would say there are four, um, I would put them at 9 or 10, depending on how you want to classify one of the groups. So like you get one type of angel that seems to be like the mighty ones, or the dunamis, but it's the Icaros, and that's a specific Greek word for those mighty angels in the book of Revelation, versus where you would have mighty angels that are in the rest of the New Testament.
Okay, gotcha. So then that leads into my next question here. So we have right out the gate, within the first 6 chapters of the book of Enoch, we have this scene that plays out with the angels atop Mount Hermon, spearheaded by Samyaza. Can you go into that there, and what the significance of it being atop Mount Hermon means for the Bible narrative?
Yeah, just for the audience, give a little bit more detail as to what's going on in that scene.
Sure. So, for those who are unfamiliar with the book of Enoch, we have this confederacy of angels. We have leaders over thousands and over 10,000s that are atop Mount Hermon, and they're being brought there by Samyaza, who is sort of their overseer. 200 angels contrive to make a pact that they are going to commit this very grievous sin with the daughters of men, and in so doing, are ensuring themselves a one-way ticket straight into the abyss.
Sure. And this is significant because it has an effect both before and after the flood. And Mount Hermon is important both before and after the flood. So the 200 angels, we don't get that biblically. Does it really matter whether there is 200, 300, or less? What we do know is biblically the sons of God, which are referenced as angels in the
Hmm.
book of Enoch, just as Job 38 recognizes the sons of God as angels, like the morning star orders of angels that are in the Old Testament. So, and other references you might look at Job 1:6 or
Sure.
2:1, and you have stars and angels and host of heaven, sons of God, and angels used interchangeably and together in pairs at times throughout the Bible, connecting them all as that type of being. So when
Hmm.
we see the sons of God in Genesis 6, this is likely from the watchers that are described in Daniel 4. So everything sort of starts to tie together. And you have this oath that is being taken, and it's Haram anathema, as it's understood. It's the accursed oath of Mount Hermon to carry it out to the end, no matter the consequences. So it's an accursed oath, and it comes from the Hebrew word haram, Charam and em. There's several different variations or words that are all sort of interlinked. So we can take the words there and we can match them up biblically in the Old Testament. And I do that in the new book for people. So sort of look forward to that comparative as well. And this is the oath-based society that they are establishing before the flood. Now,
Okay.
if giants are recreated as opposed to surviving after the flood, but I guess if they survive, you're just carrying over the oath, or there's another oath that might be sworn on Mount Hermon with the Baalim, as we would understand that biblically, who are the ones accredited in the Ugaritic text for creating the Rephaim, right?
Okay.
As
So
part of the second incursion, they would have sworn a similar oath of Haram anathema, and the oath-based world is the world we swim in today. Just as we're told
mhm.
not to swear oaths because you're going to be held accountable for that.
Yep, it's, takes it right back to Judges, with Jephthah's tragic vow,
Yeah,
and essentially taking an allowance that he really didn't have to do because God was already gonna give him victory.
yeah,
But that's really interesting. I wanna touch on one thing and then come right back to this. One of the big questions that's been arising a lot from our last talk together was, okay, well, if the Nephilim were all wiped out in the
yeah,
flood, then how do we have them back on the scene again? And
sure,
one of the things that I mentioned was that just because they were wiped out or all drowned in the flood, it does not preclude another potential sinning of angels. Because we do know
yeah,
that the fall that takes place wasn't the sin that Peter and Jude are describing in them disrobing of their
yeah,
outer bodies to copulate with human females.
yeah. And I kind of cover this off in my book that there's different theories as to how they survived the flood, and I lean heavily towards second incursion because it just makes
Mhm.
more sense, and that
It
there's a
really does.
distinction between the Rephaim and the Nephilim, um, and probably in a lot of ways that we talked about in the last show. But I recognize that they could have survived the flood somehow. So there's two other kind of buckets that I sort of put in there, and one of them is somehow on another ark, and this is under the bucket of help from the fallen angels.
Mhm. Well, and
That they
with
have free
600
choice.
flood myths over the world, like, you'd figure that, like, are all these people making this up?
Yeah, and a lot of them are giant survival stories. So, like
Mhm.
the classic is the Epic of Gilgamesh that people like to beat Christians over their heads with, and saying that's the counterfeit story that shows up in the Book of Genesis, because if we have a longer, older standing manuscript or stone version of the Epic of Gilgamesh that dates back to minimum 2150 BC from the stones, but it's more Sumerian. But what I tell Christians is don't fall into those traps that the polytheists and the seculars who answer to the polytheists will lay out there. Of course, it's an older surviving manuscript because the Torah doesn't come down to Moses until about 1400 BC. 1400 to 1450, so it has to be older. It doesn't mean
Yeah.
it's right. So, but within that, you have giant creation after the flood with Gilgamesh, because he is the son of Lugalbanda, king of Uruk, and the mother goddess, fertility goddess, queen of heaven, Nin or Nin Sun, as some of the translations are, just as Enkidu is also the offspring from the same mother goddess. That's a second creation. And so you also have a survival story there with the ark, because not only are Gilgamesh and Enkidu 2/3 god and 1/3 human, and Gilgamesh is described as 11 cubits tall, and as a king of Uruk, he'd be 19 feet tall and 7 feet wide at 4 cubits wide. So this was a giant. I mean, he's
That's
not
a big
just
old
taller,
boy right there.
he's not just a little stronger. He's a monster.
Yeah.
Even bigger than King Og would have been, based on King Og's bed size. So you have Utnapishtim and all of his family, who are archetypical Nephilim picked by fallen angels, with an ark supplied by fallen angels to survive the flood. And he's 2/3 god and 1/3 human, as is the rest of his family. So you've got both in that version as to how they might show up. Deucalion and Pyrrha is one other example in Greek mythology that are talked about as the Greek Noah. Deucalion is the son of Prometheus. So he's a giant.
Yeah.
Yeah. So another giant survival story. So, but under the bucket of fallen angels helping, they could take them in the earth, probably in another dimension, into Sheol, if they wanted to protect them. They could take them off the earth if they wanted to do that. Somehow, with the help of fallen angels, just as the fallen angels provided the ark for Utnapishtim and Deucalion. So, and you also have another bucket that people like to use, and this is my least favorite of the groups, is the somehow on the ark theory. So you have polytheists that say Ham was a giant. You have polytheists that will say all the sons and Noah were giants and all of the wives were giants. Some will say that either Tubal-Cain, as in the last Noah movie, or Og, as in doing mysticism, they were a stowaway on the ark. Some people will say in the Christian community that the wives carried the giant DNA.
I've heard that.
And that's how they show up through the Canaanites, but just the Canaanites apparently, which kind of makes, anyways, I'm not real, I don't rule them out because we're not told specifically how, but, and a lot of people might ask me, well, how could they survive the flood if God destroyed all things? Well, you have to look at the detail. If you wanted to make this argument that they survived, you could look at both in Genesis 6 and in Genesis 7. I think it's in 7:4, and I think it's 6:7, where God just said he was going to destroy everything he created. He did not create the giants. And so if you wanted to look at a legal term, and that he's still permitting free choice of the fallen angels who aren't going to go to the abyss, you could make a case that there's a survival story, but you're starting to fall in on a little bit of legalism, and I know that connection is there, but for me, if we understand that the sons of God went to women and created the Nephilim that's described in Genesis 6:4, and then again, we can understand that quite easily as again before the flood and again after the flood. And there may have been just different fallen angels that did it. And as some people have stated it, the second one was, well, one was for passion and one was for spite.
I was like, we're already damned. Might as well just go ahead and light this candle.
I think it was spite both times, but that's just my opinion.
Well, and to what you were just saying there, especially inside Genesis 7:20-24, where if we're going to be textualists and we're going to take the word at its face value, it says that every living thing on the face of the ground was what died.
Yeah.
Doesn't say as for anything atop the surface of the water. So I think that's
No.
also a very plausible idea because God knows they're not just going to stand on the very tippy top of a mountain if the
No.
water is covering 15 feet. I mean, you have to be some tall boys and then wait out almost a full year for that water to abate.
Yeah.
I don't see that happening.
Yeah. So, but either way, I mean, what we do know is, and this is very difficult for people who are part of the establishment dogma, is there are giants before the flood, there are giants after the flood.
Yep.
And you can wish them away. You can change and bend scripture like a pretzel, but you can't take the word away that says there were giants before the flood, there were giants after the flood.
Yep. Absolutely.